The diner's bell chimed, but David Miller barely heard it over the wall of silence. His daughter Lily was building with her phone. He navigated his wheelchair through the aisle with practiced ease. A powerful German shepherd walked calmly beside him, his harness marked with the words, "Service Dog." David rested a hand on Ranger's harness, feeling the steady, familiar warmth that grounded him against the tremors. They settled into a booth near the window. David ruffled the fur behind Ranger's ears, a silent gesture of thanks. A teenager with dyed black hair and a permanent scowl slid into the seat opposite him. This was Lily. She immediately pulled out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Look, I know this isn't exactly how you wanted to spend your Saturday," David began, his voice calm but firm. Lily didn't look up. "You think?" A shadow fell over their table. "I was really looking forward to this," David said, the words feeling heavy. She finally met his eyes, her gaze as sharp and unwelcoming as shattered glass. "Well, I wasn't. I'm only here because Mom said I had to be. So you can just sit there, and I'll sit here, and then we can both go home." A large man in his late 20s, with a smug, condescending smile, stood there, holding a half-empty strawberry milkshake. He was flanked by two friends who snickered quietly. "Well, well, look what we have here," the man said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "You must be the big war hero I've heard about." David remained perfectly still, but Ranger let out a low, almost imperceptible growl, his body tensing. David placed a gentle hand on the dog's back, a silent command to stand down. The bully leaned in, his eyes scanning the wheelchair. "See, you can't really bust up tables in one of those, can you? You just make a mess." He shook his head in mock disappointment. "So why are you a hero, huh? Because you screwed up and got yourself blown to pieces? Now you're just leeching off the government, living on a pity pension. What you are is a disgrace." Lily shrunk in her seat, her face flushing a deep, embarrassed red. She looked like she wished the vinyl booth would swallow her whole. The bully's eyes then fell on her. "Is that your daughter?" he asked, his tone shifting to a fake, syrupy concern. "Man, it must be tough having a loser like you for a father." The air crackled with tension. David's jaw tightened. He could feel the eyes of the entire diner on them. The clatter of cutlery had stopped. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the pounding of his own heart in his ears. He took a slow, measured breath, his training kicking in, assessing the threat, controlling the reaction. This was far from over. A hot flush crawled up David's neck. He felt the fine hairs on his arms stand up, his training screaming to assess the threat. Ranger, attuned to the slightest shift in his master's posture, let out another low growl, this one more audible, a deep rumble of warning from his chest. The bully's friends took a half-step back, but their leader just grinned wider, emboldened by the silence he'd commanded from the entire diner. "Something your dog wants to say?" the man sneered, looking down at Ranger. David's voice was dangerously calm, a flat, level surface over a deep well of emotion. "He's just reacting to the tension. I'd advise you to step away and let us finish our meal." "You're advising me?" The bully laughed, a harsh barking sound. He gestured with the milkshake glass, the thick pink liquid sloshing precariously close to the rim. "I don't think you're in any position to be giving orders, old man." This was the moment everything slowed down. David saw the man's wrist twitch, a deliberate, cruel motion. He saw the glass tilt. The world narrowed to the arc of sticky, pink liquid leaving the cup. This was no accident. It was a deliberate, cruel act of humiliation. The milkshake didn't hit David directly. It splattered across the table, splashing onto the menus and spraying across the sleeve of David's jacket. A large glob landed on Ranger's back. The German shepherd flinched but held his position, a testament to his training, though a sharp whine escaped him. The cold, sweet smell of strawberries and artificial cream filled the air around their booth. A collective gasp rippled through the diner. A small, strangled sound escaped Lily's throat, half gasp, half sob, as she stared at the pink mess. Her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and utter shame. She wasn't looking at the bully. She was staring at her father, as if he were the source of this entire, unbearable scene. "Oops," the bully said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Oh dear me. My fingers, they just play tricks on me sometimes." He placed the now empty glass on the table with a definitive thud. "Don't you worry, sir. I'll be a good citizen. I'll run to the kitchen and get a rag. I'll be right back. I'll even get you a fresh piece of key lime pie and a new coffee. On me." He winked at Lily, whose face was now buried in her hands. Then he turned and swaggered toward the back of the diner, his friends laughing as they followed him, leaving a trail of snickers and the devastating aftermath of their cruelty. The spell of silence broke. The diner erupted into a buzz of shocked whispers. David ignored them all. His focus was split between two things: the trembling dog beside him and the broken girl across from him. "Ranger, easy boy," David murmured, his voice soft but firm.
At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please share and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words.
He pulled a napkin from the dispenser and carefully wiped the milkshake from the dog's fur. Ranger leaned into the touch, his brown eyes looking up at David with unwavering trust. This simple act of care was an anchor in the storm of humiliation. Then he looked at Lily. "Lily, look at me." She shook her head, her shoulders hunched. "I can't," she whispered, her voice muffled by her hands. "I just can't. Why does this always happen?" "What always happens?" David asked, though he knew the answer. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach. She finally dropped her hands, her eyes blazing with tears she refused to shed. The staring, the pity, the mess. "I'm sick of it, Dad. I'm sick of going out in public with you. It's too embarrassing. Every single time." Each word was a tiny, sharp knife, and they found their mark with precision. David felt his composure crack. The calm military-trained facade gave way to a raw, human hurt that flashed in his eyes. He looked down at his wheelchair, at the milkshake dripping onto the floor, and for a fleeting second, he felt the truth of her words. He was a mess. His life was a mess, and he was dragging his daughter through it. The bully chose that moment to return, not with a rag, but with a fresh, full milkshake. He placed it on the table in front of Lily with a flourish. "There you go, sweetheart. Strawberry. It's your favorite, right?" Lily stared at the offensive pink drink as if it were a snake. Her voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "It was my favorite, like when I was 4. The bully just shrugged, his mission of humiliation accomplished. He gave David one last, contemptuous look, then turned and walked out of the diner with his friends, the bell on the door chiming their exit, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The damage was done. And as David looked at his daughter's stony face, he knew the real battle wasn't against some random bully in a diner. The real battle, the one he had no idea how to win, was right here at this table. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the air at their booth remained thick and heavy. The waitress, a kind-faced woman named Brenda, appeared with a damp cloth and a tray, her expression a mixture of pity and anger. "I am so sorry about that, David. Some people." She trailed off, shaking her head as she wiped down the table. "Let me get you both out of here. On the house." She cleared the spoiled food and the untouched milkshake, her movements efficient and gentle. Ranger, now clean, settled back onto the floor, his head resting on his paws, but his eyes remained alert, constantly scanning David and the room. When they were alone again, the silence between father and daughter was a chasm. David watched Lily, who was once again absorbed in her phone, but he could see the tremor in her hands. He knew she wasn't really looking at the screen. "Lily," he began, his voice softer now, the military edge gone, replaced by a father's weariness. "I know things haven't been the same since I came back." She didn't look up. "You think." "Nothing is the same since you came back," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, bitter edge. She finally locked eyes with him, and the hurt in them was a physical force. "My entire life was turned upside down. One day, I had a dad who was there. The next, I had a dad who was a ghost on a video call. And then this." She gestured vaguely at his chair and the dog. But I guess going halfway across the world to fight for people you don't even know was more important than being here for your family. The accusation, spoken aloud, hung between them. It was the core of all their arguments, the root of her anger. David's jaw tightened, the familiar ache of grief a cold stone in his chest. He took a deep breath, choosing his words with the care of a man navigating a minefield. It was never about them being more important than you, Lily. It was about duty. It was about... He struggled to find the right words that a teenager would understand, words that weren't just empty platitudes. Don't, she cut him off, her voice cracking. Just don't give me the duty and honor speech. I've heard it. And look at you now. Her gaze swept over him, and in that moment it wasn't filled with embarrassment, but with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. Was it worth it? David's own composure, held so tightly until now, finally frayed. The memory of the explosion, the searing heat, the deafening roar, the dust and the pain, it flashed behind his eyes. He remembered the long, dark months of recovery, the phantom pains, the nightmares that Ranger now helped him ward off. He remembered the price he had paid. But he also remembered the faces of the people he had helped, the bonds with the men he had served with, the unshakable belief that he was part of something that was, in its own flawed way, protecting the world she lived in. He looked at his daughter, at the young woman she was becoming, and he felt a surge of protective love so fierce it stole his breath. Yes, he said, his voice low but absolute, devoid of any doubt. It was worth it. The conviction in his voice seemed to startle her. For a second, the wall of anger faltered, and he saw a flicker of the little girl who used to run to the door when he came home. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a fresh wave of resentment. She shoved her phone into her pocket and slid out of the booth. I can't do this. I'm going to wait outside. Lily, wait. But she was already walking away, her shoulders set, not looking back. She pushed through the diner door, leaving him alone with Ranger. The dog lifted his head and whined softly, nudging David's hand with his wet nose. David absently stroked Ranger's head, his gaze fixed on the empty space where his daughter had been. The victory against the bully, if it could even be called that, felt hollow and meaningless. He pulled out his wallet to leave some cash on the table, ignoring Brenda's insistence that it was on the house. As he did, his fingers brushed against a small, worn photograph tucked inside, the edges soft, the colors faded of him, standing and in uniform, holding a laughing 5-year-old Lily on his shoulders. It felt like a lifetime ago. It was a lifetime ago. Just as he was about to maneuver his chair to leave, the bell on the diner door chimed again, but this time it wasn't Lily returning. It was a different kind of tension that swept into the room, a cold, silent dread that made the hairs on the back of David's neck stand up. Ranger was suddenly on his feet, his body rigid, a deep, menacing growl rumbling in his chest that David had never heard before. It wasn't a warning growl. It was a promise of violence. David looked up. 2 men in ski masks stood just inside the door. One of them held a black duffel bag. The other raised a heavy, black pistol, pointing it at the ceiling. "Nobody move," he yelled, his voice sharp and panicked. "This is a robbery." But as David watched his daughter walk away, one question burned in his mind. How could he possibly win a war when his own daughter was the enemy? Time didn't just slow, it fractured. The shouted command, "Nobody move," hung in the air, a stark, frozen moment of disbelief before the screaming started. The 2 masked men fanned out. The one with the duffel bag was tall and lanky. The one with the pistol was shorter, built like a bulldog. The tall one moved toward the cash register. The shorter one swept his weapon across the room, his eyes wild and jumpy behind the wool of his ski mask. Ranger's growl was a continuous, vibrating threat, a sound that seemed to make the very air tremble. David's hand tightened on the dog's harness. "Steady, Ranger. Hold." The command was a whisper, but the dog obeyed, falling into a tense, quivering silence, every muscle coiled like a spring. David's breathing slowed, his mind shifting gears with a cold, military precision. Assess. Adapt. Overcome. His focus snapped from the emotional wreckage of his fight with Lily to the immediate, lethal calculus of survival. Where is Lily? A spike of pure ice shot through his veins. She was outside. Was she safe? Had she seen the men enter? Had she run? He had to know. He had to get her back. His question was answered a second later. The door burst open again, and Lily was shoved back inside, stumbling, her face pale with terror. The taller robber had her by the arm. Saw this one trying to use her phone out there. Not a good idea, sweetheart. He pushed her toward the booth where David sat. Lily, are you hurt? David's voice was sharp, all fatherly concern, his own fear for her eclipsing everything else. She shook her head, mute, her eyes wide as she scrambled into the seat, pulling her knees up to her chest. She was shaking uncontrollably. The bulldog robber slammed his fist on a nearby table, making everyone jump. Wallets, phones, jewelry. Now, everything goes in the bag, he screamed, his voice cracking with adrenaline. You. He pointed the gun at an elderly man who was fumbling with his billfold. Move faster. The tall robber stalked through the diner, holding the duffel bag open. People whimpered as they dropped their belongings inside. The clatter of phones and the rustle of leather and fabric were the only sounds besides the ragged breathing of the terrified patrons. David watched the bulldog stance, the way he held the weapon tight, nervous, finger resting along the trigger guard. An amateur, but amateurs were unpredictable. They panicked. The tall robber reached their booth. He gestured with the bag toward Lily. Your purse. Now. Lily, tears streaming down her face, hugged her small crossbody bag to her chest. Give it to him, Lily, David said, his voice calm, a deliberate counterpoint to the chaos. It was the voice he used to use on missions to calm a nervous teammate. He kept his eyes locked on the robber, trying to establish a connection, to humanize themselves. It's not worth your life. With a sob, Lily unhooked the bag and dropped it into the duffel. The robber's eyes, visible through the mask, then fell on David. You. Wallet. David didn't move. He kept his hands resting on his lap, one still on Ranger's harness. It's in my inside jacket pocket, he said evenly. I'd have to move to get it. The bulldog robber heard this and swiveled, pointing the gun directly at David's face. The world narrowed to that dark, circular muzzle. Don't move, he shrieked. You stay still. I'll get it. Dad, Lily whispered, her voice a terrified thread. David didn't flinch. He looked past the gun, into the man's panicked eyes. You should be careful with that, he said, his tone almost conversational. The bulldog robber froze. What did you say to me? Putting your gun in a bag like that, David continued, nodding toward the duffel where the other robber had just stuffed a wallet. It's smart. Kind of. No fingerprints, no gunpowder residue on your clothes if you get stopped. He paused, letting the man process the words. There's just one little problem. The tall robber looked between David and his partner, the duffel bag hovering in midair. The bulldog's grip on the pistol tightened. Dude, what's your deal? Huh? What is that? David allowed a ghost of a smile. It's pretty big. Is that a Colt 1911? Yeah. So? So what? So, you fire off one shot, and that bag's going to burst into flames. The muzzle flash, the hot gases, that nylon bag, and all the paper inside, it'll go up like a torch. Right in your friend's hands. The tall robber instinctively took a step back, lowering the duffel bag. The bulldog's eyes widened, then narrowed with rage. He took a step closer, jamming the gun toward David. Yeah? Well, maybe one bullet is all I need to shut you up, huh? Dad, no. Lily cried out, starting to rise from her seat. David's voice cracked like a whip, but it was directed at his daughter. Lily, stay down. Stay out of sight. The bulldog's wild eyes darted to Lily, a cruel, new idea forming. A predator shifting targets. Is that your daughter? He sneered, moving the gun's aim from David to Lily. You know what? Maybe I'll put a bullet in her first. Teach you a lesson about minding your own business. A switch flipped inside David Miller. The calm assessor was gone. In his place was something primal, a force of pure, unadulterated protection. The air grew cold around him. "You," David said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly register that silenced the entire room. "Do not point that gun at my daughter." The robber laughed, a nervous, shaky sound. "You can't do nothing to stop me, old man." David's eyes were like chips of flint. "Oh, maybe that's true," he said. "But trust me, the only way you're leaving here is in handcuffs." The bulldog's face contorted with fury. "You know what? Maybe it's time I shut you up for good." He thumbed back the hammer on the pistol. The click was deafening. The click of the hammer was a sound David had heard too many times in his life, but never this close, never pointed at his child. In that splinter of a second, a lifetime of training compressed into a single, fluid instinct. The world became a series of targets and vectors, his body moving before his mind had even finished the command. Ranger. Fass. The German word for fetch was their attack command. It was a word David had hoped he would never have to use. Ranger exploded into motion, a black and tan blur, a 90-pound missile of muscle and fury. The sound wasn't a bark, but the sickening, solid thump of his body hitting the robber's arm as he clamped his powerful jaws onto it. The man screamed, a high-pitched, shock sound of pure agony. The Colt 1911 discharged, the gunshot an impossibly loud, concussive bang that made the coffee cups rattle in their saucers. The bullet tore into the ceiling, raining down dust and splinters. The robber staggered back, trying to shake the massive dog off, but Ranger held on, his weight and momentum dragging the man down. "Lily, get down." David roared, his own body shifting forward in his chair. This wasn't over. The tall robber, momentarily frozen by the sudden, violent chaos, dropped the duffel bag and fumbled in his waistband for his own weapon. David didn't have a gun. He didn't need one. His wheelchair was his weapon. He slammed the joystick forward, the motor whirring as he shot directly toward the falling bulldog robber. As the man crashed onto his back with Ranger still locked on his arm, David rammed the heavy footrests of his chair directly into the man's side. There was a grunt of forced-out air. The robber's head snapped back, cracking against the floor. His grip on the pistol finally failed, and the weapon skittered away under a nearby booth. "Ranger. AUS." David commanded. "Release." Instantly, Ranger let go, leaping back, his body still positioned between his master and the threat, a low, continuous growl rumbling from his chest. The bulldog robber lay moaning, clutching his mangled arm, completely neutralized. But the tall robber had his gun out now, a small, snub-nosed revolver. His eyes were wide with terror and rage, swinging wildly between David, the growling dog, and his incapacitated partner. "You're dead. You're all dead," he shrieked, raising the revolver. He never got the chance to fire. From a floor, Brenda, the waitress, acted with a courage born of desperation. As the tall robber focused on David, she swung a heavy, full ketchup bottle with all her might. It connected with the back of his knee with a brutal cracking sound. The man howled, his leg buckling. As he stumbled, David acted again. He wasn't close enough to ram this one, so he used what he had. He grabbed the heavy ceramic sugar shaker from his table and hurled it. It wasn't a graceful throw, but it was accurate. It struck the robber square in the chest, not causing real damage, but destroying his balance completely. He fell forward, his head hitting the edge of a table with a dull, sickening thud. The revolver flew from his hand and slid across the floor, coming to a stop at the feet of the elderly man who had been robbed earlier. The old man stared at it, then slowly, deliberately, placed his foot on top of it. Silence. For 3 long heartbeats, the only sounds were the ragged panting of Ranger, the moans of the 2 robbers, and the soft, hiccuping sobs of a few patrons. Then movement. David's head snapped toward the diner's entrance. The bell hadn't chimed. The door was still closed. But had someone else been outside? A getaway driver? The thought sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through him. "Brenda," David said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. It was calm, authoritative, the voice of a man back in command. "Call 911. Now." The spell was broken. Brenda, shaking but determined, scrambled behind the counter for the phone. David's gaze swept the room, a tactical assessment. 2 hostiles down, one critically injured by Ranger, the other possibly concussed. The immediate threat was over. His eyes finally found Lily. She was still huddled in the booth, her hands over her mouth, staring at him as if she were seeing him for the very first time. The anger, the resentment, the embarrassment, it was all gone, washed away by a tidal wave of shock and a dawning, awestruck realization. The man in the wheelchair, the man she had been so ashamed of, had just taken down 2 armed robbers with a dog and a sugar shaker. David maneuvered his chair to face her, the grim focus on his face softening. "Lily? Sweetie, are you okay? Did you get hit by anything?" She slowly lowered her hands. She was still trembling, but now it was from the aftershock, not fear. She just stared at him, her eyes wide, taking in the sight of her father, the set of his shoulders, the calm intensity in his eyes, the powerful, vigilant dog now sitting obediently at his side, its muzzle stained with the robber's blood. The calm, military-trained facade gave way, and a raw, human hurt flashed in his eyes before he could lock it down. She stammered. "I'm okay." Brenda was on the phone, her voice trembling but clear. 911, what's your emergency? Yes. We need the police. And an ambulance. It's a robbery at the Cityside Diner, 135 Green Avenue. By the depot, please hurry. No, everyone's safe. Everyone's safe. But, oh God, just get here. Please get here. As she confirmed the address, David kept his eyes on his daughter. The battle was won. The robbers were subdued. But as he looked at Lily's shell-shocked face, he knew a much more important reckoning was just beginning. The diner became a frozen tableau of shock and relief. The patrons slowly emerged from their hiding places, their eyes wide, staring at the 2 subdued robbers and the man in the wheelchair who had orchestrated their downfall. Whispers began to weave through the air, mixing with the soft sobs and the low, steady growl still emanating from Ranger. The dog hadn't moved from his protective stance, his eyes fixed on the 2 men, ensuring they posed no further threat. David ignored the stares. His entire world had shrunk to the girl in the booth. He maneuvered his chair closer to Lily. "Hey," he said, his voice soft now, the command tone gone. "Look at me." Lily's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, met his. The anger that had been her default setting for months was completely absent. In its place was a raw, overwhelming awe. "How?" she began, her voice a trembling whisper. "How did you do that? You were the only one who wasn't scared." She shook her head, as if trying to clear it of a fundamental misconception. "Are you kidding me? I've never been so scared in my entire life." David reached out and took her hand. It was ice cold and shaking. He enveloped it in both of his, warming it. "I was terrified, Lily," he admitted, his voice low and earnest. He would never lie to her about this. "Not now." My heart was pounding, so hard I thought it would burst. But I wasn't scared of them, or of dying. He paused, his gaze intense, willing her to understand. "I was terrified of losing you." The truth of his words hit her with physical force. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. The memory of the gun swinging toward her face, the cold certainty of death, flashed in her mind. And then the blur of Ranger, the shocking speed of her father's actions, all to protect her. "But you could have died," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You and Ranger, you could have been killed because of me." "Because of you?" David's brow furrowed. "No, Lily, for you. There's a world of difference." That distinction, the selfless love inherent in it, finally shattered the dam. The words she had been holding back for a year, the resentment and the grief, came tumbling out in a choked, tearful rush. "Dad, I'm sorry," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "All I've done since you came home is punish you for surviving. I was so mad at you for getting injured, for changing everything, that I didn't stop to think that I almost lost you that day. And I've been acting like you did this to me on purpose. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." David's own eyes stung. He pulled her into an awkward but fierce hug across the table, his strong arms holding her as she cried into the rough fabric of his jacket, the scent of dried milkshake and his familiar soap filling her senses. Ranger, sensing the shift in emotion, finally relaxed his stance and nudged Lily's leg with his nose, offering his own comfort. "It's okay," David murmured, stroking her hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I missed so much. I'm sorry I couldn't be the dad you needed when I came home." For a long moment, they just held each other, the sounds of the approaching sirens growing in the distance. It was the first real, unguarded moment they had shared since his return. The rubble of their relationship was still there, but for the first time, they were clearing it away together. The spell was broken by the crashing open of the diner door. 3 police officers rushed in, weapons drawn, their eyes scanning the chaotic scene. The 2 moaning robbers, the gathered, shell-shocked civilians, the man in a wheelchair holding his crying daughter. "Everyone stay calm," the lead officer barked. His eyes fell on the bulldog robber, clutching his bleeding, savaged arm, and then on Ranger, who was now sitting placidly by David's side. "What happened here?" Brenda, the waitress, stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at David. "He did it. He and his dog. They saved us all. Those 2 men were robbing us at gunpoint. He took them down." All eyes turned to David. The officers looked from the formidable German shepherd to the man in the wheelchair, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and disbelief. The lead officer holstered his weapon and approached David cautiously, his eyes flicking to Ranger. "Sir, is that true? Can you confirm what happened?" David gave Lily one last, reassuring squeeze before releasing her. He turned to face the officer, his posture straightening. He was no longer just Lily's father. He was a former Navy SEAL reporting after an engagement. "Yes, officer, I can," David said, his voice clear and steady. "My name is David Miller. And that," he said, nodding toward the bulldog robber being handcuffed by 2 other officers, "is the man who poured a milkshake on my service dog before he decided to try armed robbery." The officer's eyebrows shot up. The story was far from over, and the telling of it was about to begin. But as David started to recount the events, he felt a small, warm hand slip into his. Lily had moved to stand beside his chair, her head held high, no longer ashamed to be seen with the war hero in the wheelchair. The diner had transformed from a crime scene into a hub of official activity. Paramedics tended to the robbers. The bulldog's arm required immediate, significant attention, a fact that made Ranger puff out his chest with what seemed like canine pride. Police officers took statements from the shaken patrons, their voices a low, respectful murmur. The initial skepticism in the lead officer's eyes had vanished, replaced by a look of professional admiration as he listened to David's concise, factual report. David spoke with a clarity and precision of a seasoned operator. He detailed the robbers' entry, their weapons, their actions, and his own response. He didn't embellish. He didn't boast. He simply stated the facts, the assessment, the command to Ranger, the disabling of the first threat, and the collaborative effort with Brenda to neutralize the second. He made sure to credit the waitress's brave actions with the ketchup bottle. Throughout it all, Lily stood silently by his side, her hand resting on his shoulder. She listened, rapt, as her father described events that sounded like they were from an action movie, yet she had lived through them. She watched the way the police officers listened to him, not with pity, but with respect. They called him sir and nodded, understanding the tactical decisions he'd made in seconds. "And you identified the firearm as a Colt 1911?" the lead officer, Sergeant Evans, asked, making a note. "Yes, Sergeant," David confirmed. "Based on the profile and the caliber of the round that was fired into the ceiling. His partner had a snub-nosed revolver, .38 caliber, I believe. It's currently under that gentleman's foot." He pointed to the elderly man, who gave a firm, proud nod. Sergeant Evans let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That's some sharp observation under pressure, Mr. Miller. And the dog, Ranger, is it? His training is exceptional." "He's a good partner," David said simply, reaching down to scratch Ranger's ears. The dog leaned into the touch, his work done, his demeanor now calm and attentive. Another officer approached, holding the duffel bag of stolen goods. We'll need to log all of this as evidence, but we can return everyone's property once we've processed it. The officer held the black duffel bag, now bulging with the shapes of wallets and the faint, colorful glint of discarded phones. As the officer spoke, Lily's gaze drifted from her father to the other people in the diner. She saw the way they looked at David. It wasn't the uncomfortable, pitying stares she was used to. It was gratitude, awe. One woman mouthed thank you to him from across the room. The elderly man who had secured the revolver gave David a solemn, respectful salute. Lily's cheeks burned with a shame, so intense she had to look away from the grateful faces around her. All this time, she had been so consumed by her own embarrassment, her own anger at her changed life, that she had refused to see the man her father truly was. She had seen the wheelchair, the scars, the dog, as symbols of weakness, of a life interrupted. She now saw them for what they were, badges of honor. The wheelchair wasn't a prison, it was his command post. The dog wasn't a nuisance, he was a brother in arms. The scars weren't signs of failure, they were proof of sacrifice. Sergeant Evans finished his notes and looked at David, then at Lily, offering a kind smile. "You've got quite a father here, young lady." Lily's voice was thick with emotion, but clear and sure for the first time. "I know," she said, her grip on David's shoulder tightening. "I really do." The sergeant moved on to speak with Brenda, leaving them in a small bubble of relative quiet amidst the chaos. Lily moved around to face her father, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "All those things I said," she began, her voice trembling. "About being embarrassed, about you being a leech. I didn't mean any of it. Not really. I was just so angry at the world, and you were the easiest target." David looked up at her, his heart aching with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "I know, Lily. Anger is easier than grief. It's a lot simpler to be mad at the person who came back different than to mourn the one who left." His words articulated her own tangled emotions with an accuracy that stole her breath. That was exactly it. She had been grieving the dad she remembered, the one who could run with her, who stood tall at her school plays, and she had taken that grief out on the brave, resilient man who had actually returned to her. "I don't want to do that anymore," she whispered. "We don't have to," he said. "We start from right here, right now." The paramedics were loading the second robber onto a gurney. The police were beginning to tape off the area. The immediate drama was concluding, but the emotional landscape between father and daughter had been irrevocably altered, rebuilt in the crucible of shared terror and survival. Lily looked at Ranger, truly looking at him for the first time. She knelt down, tentatively reaching out her hand. Ranger sniffed it, then licked her fingers, his tail giving a soft thump against the floor. "Thank you, Ranger," she said, her voice earnest, "for protecting my dad, and for protecting me." The dog nudged her hand with his head, accepting her apology and her affection. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a seal on their new beginning. The trio, the veteran, his daughter, and his service dog, were finally, truly, a unit. The permission to leave the diner came with a request. The police would need formal, recorded statements from both David and Lily at the station the next day. Sergeant Evans handed David his card. "Get some rest, Mr. Miller. You've all been through a lot tonight." His eyes held a depth of understanding that went beyond the current robbery. "And thank you for your service, both then and today." The words, "then and today," hung in the air as David, Lily, and Ranger finally exited the diner. The cool night air felt like a baptism, washing away the stale sense of fear and spilled milkshake. But their ordeal was not entirely over. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers and ambulance had drawn a crowd. Onlookers and local news reporters, alerted by scanner traffic, clustered behind the crime scene tape. As they emerged, a ripple went through the crowd. A reporter, spotting David in his wheelchair with the imposing German shepherd at his side, thrust a microphone over the tape. "Sir, can you tell us what happened in there? We're hearing you confronted the armed robbers." David instinctively moved slightly in front of Lily, shielding her from the glare of the camera lights. Ranger positioned himself between David and the reporter, a silent, physical barrier. This was the last thing any of them needed. No comment, David said, his voice firm but not hostile. He kept moving, guiding Lily toward the parking lot where his specially equipped van was parked. But we're told you're a veteran, that you used your service dog to take down one of the assailants. Is that true? The reporter pressed, undeterred. The question, shouted into the night, was a stark confirmation of the new reality. The story was out. He didn't answer, focusing on the simple, mechanical task of getting Lily and Ranger into the van. But Lily, walking beside him, heard the reporter's words. We're told you're a veteran. It wasn't just the diner patrons who knew now. It would be the whole town. Soon, maybe the whole country. A complex mix of pride and a new, different kind of anxiety blossomed in her chest. The ride home was steeped in a heavy, but not uncomfortable, silence. The hum of the van's engine and Ranger's soft panting from the back were the only sounds. Lily stared out the window at the passing streetlights, her mind replaying the night's events in a relentless loop. The bully sneer, the cold splash of the milkshake, the terrifying click of the hammer, the blur of Ranger, the sound of her own voice so full of venom, saying, "It's too embarrassing." She flinched at the memory. "Dad," she said softly, breaking the silence. "Yes, sweetie." That reporter, he called you a veteran, like it was a title, like Captain America or something. She turned from the window to look at his profile, illuminated by the dashboard lights. David let out a short, quiet laugh. "It's not quite like that. It's just a job I did. A job that ended differently than I'd planned." "But it's more than that, isn't it?" Lily pressed, her voice earnest. "The way you acted in there, it wasn't just luck. It was like you knew exactly what to do. You weren't panicking. You were calculating." David was silent for a moment, navigating a turn onto their street. The military, the teams, they don't just teach you how to shoot. They teach you how to think under pressure, how to assess a threat, how to control your fear, how to use every tool available to you, even a sugar shaker. He paused. An incredibly loyal dog. Lily digested this. It was the first time he had ever offered even a glimpse into that part of his life without her having to drag it out of him. The day you were injured," she began, her voice tentative, treading on sacred ground. "Was it like that? Was it scary?" David's grip on the steering wheel tightened almost imperceptibly. The van slowed as they pulled into their driveway. He put it in park, but didn't immediately shut off the engine. He stared through the windshield into the dark garage, his mind thousands of miles away. "It was the loudest silence I've ever heard," he said, his voice distant. "After the explosion, just a high-pitched ringing and dust. So much dust. And then the pain. But the first thing I thought, the very first thing, wasn't about my legs. It was a radio check, making sure my guys were okay. And then it was you. I thought, I have to get home to Lily." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes glistening in the dim light. "That's the only thing that got me through the hospitals, the surgeries, the pain. Getting home to you." Lily felt the tears come again, but they were clean tears now, washing away the last residues of her anger. He hadn't chosen a war over her. He had carried the thought of her through a war, and through its devastating aftermath. The front porch light flicked on, and the door opened. David's wife, Sarah, stood silhouetted in the doorway, her face etched with worry. The police had called her. Lily looked from her mother's anxious face back to her father's weary, resolute one. The hidden strength she had finally seen in him now seemed as clear as the porch light. The wheelchair wasn't a symbol of what was taken. It was a testament to what he had survived. And she had been too blind, too wrapped up in her own world, to see it, until a strawberry milkshake and two armed robbers forced her to look. But as they drove away from the media scrum, David knew one thing for certain. The quiet, anonymous life he'd been trying to build was over. The warmth of the house enveloped them, a stark contrast to the chaotic chill of the night. The familiar scent of lavender cleaner and the faint aroma of the pasta Sarah had made for dinner created a sanctuary of normalcy. But the moment Sarah saw their faces, David's grim exhaustion, Lily's red-rimmed, shell-shocked eyes, normalcy shattered. "My God, are you both all right?" The police said there was a robbery, that you were involved." Her words tumbled out, her hands fluttering as she reached for David. Then Lily, unsure who to hold first. "We're okay, Mom," Lily said, her voice surprisingly steady. She stepped forward and let her mother pull her into a tight hug. Over her mother's shoulder, she saw David maneuvering through the doorway, Ranger following closely. The dog immediately did a perimeter check of the familiar living room before settling on his designated bed in the corner. His duty done for now. Sarah released Lily and moved to David, kneeling beside his chair, her hands on his face. "David, tell me you're not hurt." "I'm not hurt, Sarah," he said, covering her hands with his. He managed a weary but genuine smile. "A little sticky from a milkshake, but not hurt." A milkshake. Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion, looking between them. "The police said armed robbery." "It's a long story," David sighed. "Dad was a hero, Mom," Lily interjected, her voice filled with a fervor that made both her parents look at her. "He and Ranger, they took down 2 guys with guns. It was the most terrifying and an amazing thing I've ever seen." Sarah's eyes widened, searching David's for confirmation. He gave a slight, reluctant nod. The reality of what could have happened, what he had risked, began to dawn on her, and Sarah's face was a pale mask of worry, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe. But before fear could take root, Lily continued, her words rushing out. "And I said horrible things to him, Mom, at the diner, before it all happened. I was so awful." Her voice cracked, but she didn't break down. She needed to say this. "I told him I was embarrassed to be seen with him. I told him he was a leech." Sarah gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at David, her eyes full of pain for him. "Lily." "No, let me finish," Lily insisted, tears now streaming freely down her face. "When that man pointed the gun at me, the only thing in the whole world that mattered was Dad and Ranger. And I realized I almost lost him forever, and the last year I've been treating him like he was nothing." She turned to David, her expression one of raw remorse. "I'm so sorry, Dad, for all of it. You're not a leech. You're a hero, and I'm so proud you're my father." The confession, uttered in the safe haven of their home, hung in the air. It was the full, unvarnished truth, and its power was immense. David reached out and pulled Lily into a hug, his strong arms holding her tight. Sarah wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a protective, united circle. For a long time, they just held each other, the silence speaking volumes of forgiveness, love, and a family finally beginning to heal. "I'm proud of you too, Lily," David murmured into her hair. "You were brave tonight. You kept your head down when I told you to. You helped by not becoming a target. That took courage." His words reframed her terror as an act of bravery. She hadn't felt brave. She'd felt helpless. But he saw it differently. He saw her obedience under fire as a contribution to their survival. They finally broke apart, the emotional storm subsiding into a quiet, weary calm. Sarah, ever the practical one, sniffled and said, "Okay, I think this calls for some hot chocolate. The really unhealthy kind with the little marshmallows." Lily managed a small, wet smile. "Yeah, that sounds good." As Sarah bustled in the kitchen, Lily sat on the floor next to Ranger's bed. She looked at the German Shepherd, really seeing the powerful lines of his body, the intelligent, watchful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered again, stroking his head. Ranger thumped his tail and licked her wrist, a simple, forgiving gesture that felt more profound than any words. David watched them, his heart feeling fuller than it had in years. The confrontation in the diner had been a nightmare, but it had also been a crucible. It had burned away the lies and the resentment, forcing the truth to the surface. Later, as they sipped their hot chocolate, the story came out in full. The bully, the milkshake, Lily's harsh words, the sudden arrival of the robbers, the attack command, the sugar shaker, Brenda's ketchup bottle. Sarah listened, her face a canvas of horror, pride, and maternal fury. When they were done, she looked at David, her love and fear warring in her eyes. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "I know," he said, holding her gaze. "But I wasn't. And because we weren't, and because of what happened, we're here. Really here. Together. Lily nodded, curling up on the sofa next to her mother. Together, she echoed softly. It wasn't a magic fix. There were still years of adjustment ahead, difficult conversations to be had, and trauma to process. But the wall was gone. The foundation of their family, cracked and shaky for so long, had been reinforced with the unbreakable steel of shared experience and hard-won understanding. For the first time since David had returned, the house truly felt like a home. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window felt different. It was softer, kinder, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like tiny celebrants. The familiar routine of the Miller household unfolded, but the silence that had once been heavy and strained was now comfortable, filled with a new, tentative understanding. David was at the table, sipping his coffee. Ranger lay at his feet, head on his paws, but his ears twitched at every small sound in the house, ever vigilant. The events of the previous night were a fresh, raw layer over their lives, but for the first time, it felt like a foundation they could build on, not a stain they had to hide. Lily came downstairs, dressed not in her usual uniform of black and disinterest, but in a simple, clean sweater and jeans. She paused in the doorway, watching her father for a moment. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was a calmness in his posture that had been missing for a long time. "Morning," she said softly. David looked up and smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" "Surprisingly, yeah," she said, moving to the counter to pour herself some cereal. "I thought I'd have nightmares, but I didn't." She sat down opposite him. "I just dreamed about being here." It was a simple statement, but it held a world of meaning. Here was no longer a place of conflict. It was a place of safety. Sarah joined them, placing a gentle hand on David's shoulder. "The police station called while you were in the shower. They're ready for our statements whenever we are." She said "are" deliberately, including herself in the process, a united front. "Are?" Lily asked, glancing up. "Of course," Sarah said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We're a family. We do this together." The drive to the police station was quiet, but the silence was thoughtful, not tense. Lily watched her father navigate the traffic, his hands steady on the wheel, his profile strong. She saw the way other drivers glanced at their van, at the wheelchair emblem on the license plate, and she felt no embarrassment, only a fierce, protective pride. At the station, Sergeant Evans greeted them personally. They gave their statements, David with calm precision, Lily with a newfound, steady voice. When the sergeant confirmed the bully had been charged with disorderly conduct and assault based on witness accounts, Lily felt a surge of vindication. The world was finally starting to see her father as she now saw him. As they were finishing up, a young officer tapped on the door and whispered something to Sergeant Evans. The sergeant's expression became slightly pained. "Mr. Miller, I have to inform you that the story has hit the local news. There's a small media contingent outside. You're under no obligation to speak to them. We can escort you out a back exit." David exchanged a look with Sarah and Lily. "What do you think?" he asked them. Lily surprised herself by speaking first. "We don't need the back door." She lifted her chin. "We didn't do anything wrong." So they walked out the front doors of the police station, into a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. David kept a protective arm around Lily's shoulders, while Sarah held his other hand. Ranger walked calmly at his side, ignoring the commotion. "Mr. Miller, how does it feel to be a hero? Can you tell us about your military service?" "Lily, were you scared?" They kept walking, a solid, unbreakable unit, not stopping to answer. But just as they reached their van, David paused. He turned, not to the reporters, but to the cameras. His gaze was steady, his voice clear and firm. "My dog and I did what anyone would do to protect their family," he said. "The real heroes are still overseas. Please remember that." It was all he said before turning back to help Lily into the van. As they drove away, Lily looked out the window at the reporters, who were now buzzing with this new soundbite. She didn't see prying invaders, she saw messengers. They were going to tell the world a story, the true story about her father. She looked over at David, who was focused on the road, and at Ranger, who was now resting his head on her lap. The shame was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable certainty. The man in the driver's seat wasn't just her dad. He was David Miller, a veteran, a protector, and her hero. And she would never, ever be embarrassed by him again. The quiet didn't last long. By the time they returned home, David's phone was buzzing incessantly, old buddies from his unit, fellow veterans he hadn't heard from in years, even a reporter from a national news outlet who had somehow gotten his number. He silenced it, placing the phone face down on the kitchen counter. The outside world was crashing in, but inside the house, a fragile new peace was taking root. Lily, however, was on her phone, but this time she was scrolling through a different kind of feed. Her social media was flooded with shares of the local news clip. There was her father, calm and dignified, with Ranger by his side and her mother holding his hand. The comments were a torrent of support. A real-life hero. That dog deserves a steak. The way he protected his daughter. I'm not crying, you're crying. She saw a meme someone had made, a picture of a strawberry milkshake with a red circle and a line through it, and the caption, "Don't be this guy." The bully had been publicly identified and universally condemned. A wave of vindication, warm and fierce, washed over her. The narrative had been flipped. The shame she had felt was now being reflected back onto the people who deserved it. "They're calling you a hero," she said, holding her phone out to David. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable. The internet has a short memory, Lily. It's just noise. But to Lily, it wasn't noise. It was validation. It was the entire world finally seeing what she had been too blind to see. She felt a sudden, urgent need to cement this new reality, to prove to him, and to herself, that her change of heart was permanent. Can I take Ranger for a walk?" she asked. It was a simple question, but it was loaded with meaning. Taking the service dog for a walk was a chore she had always resented, seeing it as a public advertisement of her father's disability. David studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Sure. His leash is on the hook. Remember, he's working. Don't let people pet him. He needs to stay focused." "I know," Lily said, her voice full of newfound respect for the dog's role. The moment she stepped outside with a powerful German shepherd, she felt the eyes of the neighborhood on her. But instead of shrinking, she stood a little taller. A woman from across the street, Mrs. Gable, who usually just gave a polite, pitying smile, waved and called out, "We saw the news, Lily. Your father is an amazing man." Lily smiled back, a real, unforced smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable. He really is." As they walked, Ranger was the picture of professionalism, his harness signaling his serious purpose. He didn't pull or strain. He matched his pace to hers, his head on a swivel, constantly assessing their environment. She felt a surge of affection for him. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a companion, a living, breathing piece of her father's resilience. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a text from Megan, one of the popular girls at school who had never given her the time of day. "Megan, OMG Lily, is that your dad on the news? That's so crazy. You have to tell me everything at school on Monday." Lily stared at the message. A week ago, this text would have been her worst nightmare. Now it felt different. It wasn't pity. It was interest, maybe even admiration. The very thing that had made her a social pariah, her broken dad, was now making her intriguing. But a cold knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. Monday. School. The hallways were a different beast from the supportive neighborhood street. The same people who were now leaving supportive comments online could just as easily whisper and stare in person. The story was out there, but was the change inside her strong enough to withstand the pressure of high school? When she returned home, she found her father in the living room, staring at a small, velvet-lined box he held in his hands. He looked up as she came in, his eyes distant. "What's that?" Lily asked, unhooking Ranger's leash. David hesitated, then opened the box. Nestled inside was a silver medal, the Sunburst badge attached to a blue and white ribbon. "It's a silver star," he said quietly. I never really knew what to do with it. It felt like it belonged to a different person. The person I was before. Lily approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the gleaming metal. It was tangible proof of the heroism she had only just begun to understand. What did you get it for? For actions in a firefight that led to this, he said, gesturing to his legs. I got my team out, but I didn't get myself out in one piece. He closed the box with a soft click. I put it away because every time I looked at it, I just remembered the cost. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a casualty. Lily's heart ached for him. She had been so focused on her own pain, she had never considered the complex weight of his own memories and medals. Do you feel like a hero now? She asked softly. David looked from the box in his hands to her face, and then to Ranger, who had settled at his feet. He took a deep breath. No, he said, his voice firm but kind. I feel like a dad who protected his daughter. And that feels better than any medal ever could. In that moment, Lily understood the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. His worth wasn't in a piece of silver or in the headlines. It was in this room. It was in the steadfast loyalty of his dog and in the love of his family, a love she was now, finally, ready to give without reservation. But as she looked at the closed box, a new resolve sparked within her. The world was going to see his medal. They were going to see the whole story. She didn't know how yet, but she knew she had to be the one to show them. The little girl who was once ashamed of her father was now ready to become his fiercest defender. Monday morning arrived cloaked in a layer of low, gray clouds, mirroring the anxiety churning in Lily's stomach. The supportive cocoon of her home and neighborhood felt a million miles away. High school was a different ecosystem, governed by ruthless social laws where anything different was prey. She walked through the front doors of Northwood High, and it began immediately. The whispers, the sidelong glances, the conversations that halted as she passed. It was exactly what she had feared, but the texture of it was different. It wasn't the usual pitying dismissal. It was charged with a new, uncertain curiosity. She was no longer just the girl with the dad in the wheelchair. She was the girl from the diner. Her first two classes were a blur of muffled sounds and intense focus on her notebook. She kept her head down, trying to become invisible. But during the passing period to third period history, the gauntlet was fully thrown. A group of juniors, led by a boy named Kyle known for his loudmouth arrogance, blocked her path near the water fountain. The hallway, once a cacophony of slamming lockers and shouts, fell into a dead, ringing silence as Lily faced Kyle. Well, if it isn't the celebrity, Kyle said, smirking. Heard your old man made a big scene. Got a dog to do his fighting for him. The old Lily would have flushed with shame, muttered an apology, and scurried away. But the new Lily, the one who had seen a gun pointed at her face and watched her father stare her down, felt something hot and solid form in her chest. She stopped walking and looked directly at Kyle. His name is Ranger, she said, her voice clear and carrying in the crowded hallway. He's a decorated service dog. And yes, he helped my father stop 2 armed robbers who were terrorizing a diner full of people. Is there something about that you find funny? Kyle's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected a response, least of all one delivered with such icy calm. The students gathering around them were silent, watching. Whatever, Kyle recovered, shrugging with forced nonchalance. Still seems like a circus act. A guy in a chair and a tack dog. The words were meant to sting, but they bounced off the armor of her new reality. She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. My father was a Navy SEAL, she said, and the title, spoken aloud in the high school hallway, had a weight that silenced the last of the whispers. He was injured in combat, saving the lives of his team. That circus act you're mocking has more courage and honor in one single decision than you'll probably have in your entire life. So, unless you've ever had to be brave a day in your life, maybe you should just shut up. The hallway was utterly silent. Kyle stared at her, his mouth slightly agape, completely disarmed. A teacher, Mr. Henderson, emerged from his classroom. Is there a problem here? Lily turned to him, her heart hammering against her ribs, but her expression serene. No, Mr. Henderson. No problem at all. She turned and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. She didn't look back. With every step, the knot of anxiety in her stomach loosened, replaced by a soaring, powerful certainty. She had done it. She had faced the wolf pack of high school judgment and not only survived, she had won. The story of the hallway confrontation spread faster than the news of the robbery itself. By lunchtime, the dynamic had shifted entirely. Where there had been uncertain whispers, there were now nods of respect. Where there had been mocking smirks, there were hesitant, genuine smiles. Megan, from the popular clique, waved her over to their table. "Lily, that was epic what you said to Kyle. You totally destroyed him." Lily accepted the invitation, but the thrill of social acceptance felt secondary, almost trivial. She had defended her father not to get a seat at the popular table, but because it was the truth. The respect of her peers was a pleasant side effect, not the goal. When the final bell rang, she walked out of school feeling lighter than she had in years. The gray clouds had begun to break, allowing slanted rays of afternoon sun to illuminate the pavement. She saw her mother's car waiting at the curb, but she also saw David, seated in his wheelchair on the paved path just beyond the school gate, Ranger sitting patiently beside him. He had come to pick her up. A week ago, the sight would have filled her with dread. Now, without a moment's hesitation, she walked straight to him and wrapped her arms around him in a tight, public hug. She felt him stiffen for a second in surprise, then relax, his arms coming around to hold her. "Hey you," David said, his smile warm. "How was the first day back?" "It was good, Dad," she said into his shoulder. "It was really good." She pulled back and looked at him, then at Ranger, giving the dog a fond scratch behind the ears. "I told them," she said simply. "I told them who you are, and I'm not going to stop." David's eyes grew suspiciously bright. He cleared his throat, nodding. "Okay," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Okay." As they moved toward the car, Lily didn't slouch or hurry. She walked tall, beside her father's chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. The gauntlet had been run, and she had emerged not just unscathed, but transformed. The path ahead wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about building a new life, out in the open, with her father and his loyal dog at her side, proud of the story they now shared. The following week was a whirlwind of a new, strange normal. The story in the local paper had a photo of David and Ranger with the headline, "Veteran and Service Dog Thwart Diner Robbery." A local veterans group reached out, inviting David to speak at an upcoming fundraiser. For the first time, he didn't immediately decline. Lily watched it all from the center of a storm, her own life reshaped by the events. The awkwardness at school had vanished, replaced by a quiet respect. She found herself spending less time on her phone and more time with her father, asking questions about his training, his team, even the different breeds of military working dogs. A world she had refused to see was now opening up to her, and she was fascinated. It was during one of these conversations, as David explained how Ranger was trained to detect his rising anxiety before a panic attack could take hold, that the doorbell rang. Sarah answered it and returned to the living room with a man in a crisp suit and a woman holding a small, professional video camera. "David, Lily," Sarah said, her voice a mix of caution and pride. "This is Mr. Evans from the city mayor's office. He'd like to speak with you." Mr. Evans stepped forward, his hand extended. "Mr. Miller, it's an honor. And this must be Lily and Ranger." He smiled warmly. "The city council was incredibly moved by your story. Your courage and your daughter's composure have been an inspiration to the entire community." David shook his hand, his expression guarded. "We just did what we had to do." "Which is the mark of true character," Mr. Evans replied. "Which is why, on behalf of the mayor and the city, I would like to formally invite you and your family to a small ceremony next week. We would like to present you with the Civilian Medal of Valor and recognize Ranger as an honorary K-9 of the city." Lily's breath caught in her throat. A medal? From the city? She looked at her father, expecting to see the same reluctance he had shown towards his silver star. But his face was different. He was looking at her, at the undisguised hope and pride shining in her eyes. He then looked at Ranger, who was sitting attentively, his head tilted as if following the conversation. This honor wasn't just for him. It was for the dog who had saved him in more ways than one, and for the daughter who had finally come back to him. He turned back to Mr. Evans. "We would be honored," David said, his voice firm. The day of the ceremony was bright and sunny. They arrived at City Hall, a place Lily had only ever been on a school field trip. Now she was walking in, her hand tucked through her father's arm, her mother on his other side, Ranger walking in perfect heel position. The chamber was filled with people, city officials, police officers, veterans, and reporters. When the mayor called his name, David maneuvered his chair to the front. Lily and Sarah stood just behind him, a united front. Ranger sat at attention, his gaze fixed on David. The mayor spoke about courage under fire, about the spirit of community, and about the unique bond between a veteran and his service animal. Then he turned to David. "David Miller, your actions protected dozens of innocent people. But perhaps the most profound impact was the example you set for your family and for our city. You showed us that true strength isn't about the use of your legs, but the courage in your heart." He placed the medal, a bronze star on a red, white, and blue ribbon, around David's neck. The chamber erupted in applause. Then, the mayor produced a smaller, custom-made blue bandana with the city's seal embroidered on it. He knelt and tied it gently around Ranger's neck. "And to Ranger, for your unwavering service and bravery, we welcome you as an honorary member of our city's first responders." The applause was even louder. Camera flashes popped. But then, the mayor did something unexpected. He looked past David to Lily, and to Lily Miller. "We heard how you stood by your father. Your strength and your love are a different, but no less vital, kind of courage." He handed her a small, engraved plaque. It read, "For exemplary courage and familial devotion." Lily took it, her hands trembling, tears welling in her eyes. She hadn't expected this. She had spent so long being part of the problem, and now she was being recognized as part of the solution. It felt like a final, public absolution. The mayor asked if David would like to say a few words. David looked at the microphone, then at the crowd. He nodded. He wheeled himself to the podium, adjusting the mic. "Thank you," he began, his voice clear and steady. "This is for Ranger, who is a better partner than I ever deserved." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And it's for my wife, Sarah, who never saw the chair, only the man." He turned slightly to look at Lily, his voice softening. "And most of all, this is for my daughter, Lily, who, in one night, taught me more about forgiveness and resilience than I learned in a lifetime of service. You are my greatest victory." The applause was thunderous, but Lily didn't hear it. She was lost in her father's gaze, in the love and pride she saw there. The medal around his neck, the bandana on Ranger, the plaque in her hands, they were just symbols. The real honor was in this moment, in this healed family, standing together in the bright, unshadowed light of day. The medals on the mantle were no longer reminders of loss, but bookends to a story of survival. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that was strikingly different from the tense, silent existence of before. The phone calls for media eventually slowed to a trickle, and the family was grateful for the return of quiet. But this quiet was different. It was peaceful. On Saturday morning, the smell of pancakes and bacon filled the house. Lily was at the stove, a comically large apron tied around her waist, carefully flipping a pancake, while David coached her from the kitchen table. "Wait for the bubbles to pop and leave little holes," he instructed, sipping his coffee. "That's when you know it's time." Ranger was lying in a patch of sunlight, his nose twitching at the delicious scents, but he remained on his bed, knowing the kitchen was off limits during meal prep. I know, Lily said, a smile playing on her lips. "You've only told me 100 times." She successfully flipped the pancake, which landed back in the pan with a perfect, buttery sizzle. "Huh. See? I'm a natural. All those MREs I ate make me a connoisseur of fine cuisine," David deadpanned. "And that, right there, is a work of art." Sarah came in, tying her hair back. "Well, this is a nice change. I could get used to not being the only cook in the house." It was a simple domestic scene, but it was one Lily knew she would have hated just a few weeks ago. She would have been sullen, resentful of the forced family time. Now, she felt a contented warmth spreading through her chest. This was what she had almost lost forever. After breakfast, Lily grabbed Ranger's leash. "Come on, boy. Walk time." David raised an eyebrow. "You're becoming his primary caretaker. He's going to get spoiled." "He deserves it," Lily said, clipping the leash to Ranger's harness. "And so do you." She leaned down and kissed her father on the cheek before heading out the door. The walk was becoming their ritual. As they moved through the neighborhood, Lily no longer saw the streets as a gauntlet of judgment. She saw friendly faces. Mr. Peterson, the retired mailman, waved from his porch. A little girl from down the street ran up, her mother close behind. "Can I pet your dog?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide. "Sorry, sweetie," Lily said gently. "He's working. But you can say hello." She guided Ranger to sit, and he allowed the girl to carefully stroke his head, his tail giving a single, dignified thump on the pavement. "Thank you," the mother said. "We saw you on the news. Your whole family is so brave." "Thank you," Lily replied, her voice steady. She continued her walk, a sense of belonging settling deep within her. She wasn't just David Miller's daughter anymore. She was Lily Miller, and she was proud of what that name represented. When she returned home, she found her father in his study, a small, determined frown on his face as he looked at his laptop. Ranger trotted over and laid his head on David's knee. "What's up?" Lily asked. David sighed. "The veterans group. They were serious about that speaking engagement. They want me to talk at their annual gala next month." "And?" Lily prompted, leaning against the doorframe. "And I have no idea what to say," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not a public speaker. I'm just a guy who ended up in a bad situation and got lucky." Lily walked over and looked at the screen. It was a blank document. "You could tell them the truth," she said softly. David looked up at her. "What truth?" "The whole truth," she said. "Not just the part about the robbery. The part before. The hard part. About coming home and feeling broken. About how your family fell apart. About how a dog and a stupid milkshake and two idiots with a gun somehow helped put it all back together." David was silent, considering her words. He looked from her earnest face to Ranger's loyal eyes. She was right. The hero narrative the city had celebrated was clean and simple. But the real story, the messy, painful, and ultimately redemptive one, was what might actually mean something to the people in that room, people who likely understood struggle all too well. A slow smile spread across his face. "You're pretty smart, you know that?" Lily grinned. "I get it from my dad." He turned back to the laptop, his fingers hovering over the keys. The blank page didn't seem so intimidating anymore. He had a story to tell. Their story. It wasn't a story that ended with a medal. It was a story that began with a family, finally whole, finally healed, and finally ready to face whatever came next, together. He typed a single sentence, the first of many. "It's funny how the worst day of your life can sometimes become the best." The night of the Veterans Gala arrived, the hotel ballroom buzzing with the low hum of conversation and the soft clinking of silverware. Lily adjusted the strap of her simple black dress, her nerves a fluttering colony in her stomach. But they weren't nerves of embarrassment or dread. They were the nerves of pride, of anticipation. She sat at a table near the front with her mother, their hands clasped tightly together. Ranger, wearing his honorary city bandana, lay calmly at their feet under the table, his presence a steadying anchor. On stage, the podium stood waiting. David was in his wheelchair just off stage, his notes on a small tablet in his lap. He saw Lily watching him and gave her a small, confident nod. The look in his eyes wasn't the haunted distance of the man who had returned from war, nor the weary resignation of the father she had rejected. It was the clear, focused gaze of a man who had found his footing on a new battlefield and had emerged victorious. The master of ceremonies, a retired colonel, took the podium. "Our next speaker needs little introduction. His story has inspired our city, but tonight, he's here to share the story behind the story. A story of service, sacrifice, and the sometimes difficult road home. Please welcome David Miller." The applause was immediate and respectful. David maneuvered his chair to the center of the stage, the spotlight catching the silver in his hair. He adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and looked out at the sea of faces, faces of men and women who understood the language of sacrifice. "It's funny," he began, his voice echoing slightly in the hushed room, "how the worst day of your life can sometimes become the best, if you're lucky enough to survive it and brave enough to learn from it." He didn't start with the explosion that took his legs. He didn't start with the firefight that earned him the Silver Star. He started with a teenage girl. "I came home from my last deployment a different man. And my daughter, Lily, saw that different man as a stranger. And to be honest, for a long time, I was a stranger to myself." He looked directly at Lily, and a spotlight found her, blushing but holding his gaze. She was angry, and she had every right to be. I had missed birthdays, school plays, and the simple, everyday moments that built childhood. I came back broken, and in her eyes, I had broken her world, too. He spoke of a silence that had filled their house, a silence louder than any explosion. He spoke of the shame he felt, not for his injuries, but for the disconnect from his own family. He spoke of Ranger not just as a service dog, but as a bridge back to the world, a living, breathing creature who demanded he stay present. Then he told them about the diner, not as a heroic tale, but as a human one. He described the milkshake not as a prelude to a fight, but as the final, crushing symbol of his daughter's embarrassment. He described the cold, sticky feeling of it and the much colder feeling of her words. "It's too embarrassing." "The robbery didn't feel like a crisis at first," he confessed. "It felt like an extension of the nightmare my life had become. But then I saw the gun pointed at my daughter. And in that moment, every bit of training, every instinct, every ounce of love I had for her, it all clicked into place. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being a father." He described the command to Ranger, the takedown, the sugar shaker. The crowd laughed, a release of tension, when he credited Brenda the waitress and her ketchup bottle. But then he grew quiet again. The real victory that night wasn't stopping the robbers. The real victory happened after the police left. It happened when my daughter looked at me, not with anger or shame, but with understanding. She finally saw me. Not the broken veteran, not the guy in the wheelchair, but her dad. And I finally saw her, not the angry teenager, but the brave, resilient young woman she had become. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the audience. Many were nodding, their eyes glistening. They understood that the hardest battles aren't always fought on foreign soil. "My service taught me about courage and duty," David concluded, his voice growing stronger. "But my family and the journey back to them taught me about forgiveness, resilience, and a different, deeper kind of love. The medal I received from the city is an honor I will always cherish. But the look in my daughter's eyes now, when she isn't ashamed to be seen with me, that is the highest honor I will ever receive." He turned his chair slightly, pointing to Lily and Sarah. "My wife, Sarah, who never gave up on me. My daughter, Lily, who found her way back to me. And Ranger, who never left my side. They are my mission, now and always. And that is a story worth telling. Thank you." The applause was not just loud, it was thunderous, a rolling wave of respect and shared emotion that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ballroom. People rose to their feet, a standing ovation for the man on the stage, and for the family he had fought so hard to reclaim. As the lights came up and people began to move toward him, Lily didn't wait. She weaved through the crowd and climbed the few steps to the stage, ignoring the protocol. She threw her arms around her father's neck, hugging him tightly. "You were amazing," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "No," he said, holding her close. "We are amazing." He looked over her shoulder at Sarah, who was making her way toward them, her face radiant with pride. Ranger, having followed Lily, sat beside David's chair, his tail thumping softly against the stage floor, his job, for now, complete. The story that had begun with an explosion overseas, wound through the silent battles of a broken home, and climaxed in a burst of violence in a diner, had found its resolution not in a medal or a headline, but in this simple, powerful moment of connection. The war was over. The healing was complete. And the future for David Miller and his family was finally, beautifully beginning.
If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.